GoDaddy is one of the biggest players in the domain name space. So if you look at like largest domain registrars, you will see GoDaddy has over 84 million domains, and then Tucows and Oname and all of these people. With 84 million staggering domain names registered, I would still recommend, if you are on GoDaddy or if you are, purchasing your next domain, probably you don't want to use GoDaddy because of one reason, which I'll tell you in this video. So this video is gonna be slightly technical. If you are a non-technical folk, you can just take away from this video is that if you have any other option except for GoDaddy for now for registering a new domain, probably go for that. For technical people, let me tell you what exactly is the problem with GoDaddy. So before understanding what the real issue with GoDaddy is, we need to understand a few terms about domain names in general and how DNS works. So there are different kind of DNS records that exist, right? Some of them, for example, I'll just mention a few of them which are very popular. A TXT, a text record, a CNAME record, an A record, for example, MX record. So all of these records have their own different purposes, right? So a TXT record is mostly an informational record. So if you want to, I'm sure like you would have seen, if you are verifying your domain on Google Search Console or things like this, they ask you to add a TXT record. A CNAME record and an A record actually are more or less the same thing. They allow you to point your subdomain or a domain to a specific server which handles that request, right? An MX record is for using for mailing, right? So if you want to receive emails and all, so you will configure MX records. So what happens with GoDaddy is something weird on a CNAME level. Not exactly weird, I would say, but they don't follow a very popular thing which is out there, which is known as CNAME flattening. GoDaddy doesn't support this. And it's a huge registrar, right? It's not like, it just has a few million domains. It has 84 million domains. And this is a big thing because I'll tell you what happens. What is CNAME flattening? All of this, let's just discuss now in detail. And you will then figure out that, yes, this makes a lot of sense. Let's understand it by an example. I'll just show you one of the use cases of why CNAME flattening is important. So let's say if you have a domain like acme.fermion.app. Just to give you an example, Fermion is a platform that allows you to build your own technical content places, right, online. So if you want to create a platform where you are selling courses, it could be technical, it could also be non-technical if you wish, because the toolings are same. But if you want to sell your own courses, your own coding labs, you want to combine it under your own branding, you use a platform like Fermion. So what we do is we discuss with a lot of creators on a daily basis, and most of them want to have their own domains, right? So for example, let's say if you are a content creator and you are trying to create something sorts of Udemy or Codecademy of your own. So either you can go ahead and build that from scratch, which will take you a lot of time and effort, or you can use a platform like Fermion, where what we will do is we'll set up a domain for you and all of the things just start working right off the box. So you have an admin panel, you have an ability to create courses, host content, create course bundles, attach payment gateways, all of that is available by default. What happens with a system like this? This is a software as a service, right? If you have seen platforms like WordPress, for example, or even Shopify. So these platforms also work in a similar way, where you just deploy it on your own domain and that's it. You just use the software directly and you retain all the access, all the control. So what happens here is that what we do is we also give creators the ability to host this on your own domains, right? So the instructions for that, how that works is that we map a specific part of domain to their real domain. So how it works is, let's say your name is Rahul, for example, and you are opening a Rahul Coding Academy, right? And you have a domain called rahulcodingacademy.com, right? So you like Fermion a lot. You like the ability to create live courses, coding labs, all of this, and you want to host this on your own website. Now, the first thing you will do is you will decide where I want to host it, whether it's this domain, this origin, for example, or if it is like something like academy.rahulcodingacademy.com and so on. Like, you can have www as well if you want. So all of these are like possible options with Fermion. The problem happens, let's say if your domain is with GoDaddy, right? So I'll tell you what the problem happens with us when we are talking to these creators. Let me just tell you how each of these domains will get set up on Fermion on a DNS level. So what happens is that we will tell you to do two things. We'll tell you to add a TXT record, domain verification for Fermion. So we'll tell you to add one TXT record, right? Which would point to, which would be just for verification. And the second thing which we'll do is we'll tell you to add a CNAME record to cname.fermion.app, right? To whatever origin or whatever host name you want, right? So what this basically means is that, let's say you choose rahulcodingacademy.com, right? What we will do is we'll ask you that this Rahul Coding Academy should be pointed as a CNAME to cname.fermion.app. So what this effectively means, this line, what this means is that when your browser or when your operating system asks the DNS service, whatever you are using, that, hey, what is the domain's IP address? Because at the end, every domain must have an IP address, right? Otherwise, how would you resolve it? So let's just also try to use that somehow. So I'll say dig plus, let's say, acme.fermion.app. Why not? So you see, when I wrote dig acme.fermion.app, what happened was it tried to return me two A records, right? So these are like two IP addresses. Either one of them can work. So my computer can use either one of these IP addresses to connect to the website. Now what happens with providers like Vercel and Cloudflare, what happens is that how they work is they have their own IP addresses. So for example, this is an IP address set of Cloudflare. So how Cloudflare works is that, let's say this is Cloudflare, right? In the middle. You are here as a user, and here this is our server, right? Now this server could be anything. This might as well just be Cloudflare itself if Cloudflare is the origin, or it could be Vercel, which in our case is Vercel. So user, what it says that, okay, I want to access, rahulcodingacademy.com, right? So this is the domain which the user was able to get the IP address of, right? So the user got the IP address of this domain. It asked Cloudflare and it said that the host is Rahul Coding Academy. Now this set of IP address which we just got, it's not a dedicated IP address, right? So if you see, for example, let's say if I dig CodeDam also, you will see, okay, in this case, these IP addresses are different, but this is possible that if I dig a website, which is acme2.fermion.app, 12.159. So you see 104.18.12.159, both of them have same IP addresses, right? So here is a problem. Now, how does Cloudflare even know that which request is coming with? It knows with the host header, right? So it knows from the host header that you want to access this website irrespective of the IP address of the machine which was there, right? So this is how Cloudflare works. It doesn't allocate dedicated IP addresses to dedicated domains. It uses a very shared pool or even anycast IP address and just distinguishes the request which is coming through an host header. Based on that host header, Cloudflare decides that, okay, this request is for you, your specific server, so we'll just point it to you, right? And then the server responds and so on. Okay, so far what we have understood is that Cloudflare as a provider, or even Vercel, I think, uses a shared pool of IP addresses with no dedicated IP for a specific host. All right. So, I mean, you do get dedicated IP addresses with Cloudflare, I think, on enterprise plan, but you can purchase it like it becomes expensive. But if you're on a free or pro or even a business plan, I think you don't have that option. Second thing is that once this is done, that means there is no fixed IP to be added in DNS. That means the only thing you can do is add a CNAME record, right? So just to iterate again, I think we haven't talked about the difference between A record and CNAME record. So CNAME record, what basically CNAME record does is that, let's say if you have a CNAME record of cname.fermion.app, let's say, if this is pointed to Rahul Coding Academy, learn.rahulcodingacademy, let's say. So if learn.rahulcodingacademy.com is on cname.fermion.app, what's going to happen is that your browser will actually go to cname.fermion.app in order to get the IP address of cname itself, right? Which your browser will say that, okay, your browser comes here, browser, what is IP? learn.rahulcodingacademy.com. This domain says that I don't know, ask my cname, right? Then your browser goes and asks the CNAME, the same question. What is the IP? And then based on whatever rules, cname.fermion.app returns a set of two IP addresses, right? 2 or 3 or however many. So over here, which you see these two IP addresses, these are returned by the CNAME, right? So this one, let's say for example, and this one. Right? So if I give you a real example of a website, for example, let's say this for example is also hosted on Fermion. So these two IP addresses are answered by somebody else. We haven't added these two IP addresses in the DNS explicitly, right? So you'll ask me like, Mehul, what's the problem? It looks good so far. Well, the problem happens is that CNAME records are not supported on the naked domain, on the root domain. CNAME records are only supported when you have a subdomain. Even if it is www, it will be supported. But if you have something like just this, then DNS spec in general does not have support for CNAME records. So if you look at this question, which somebody asked, like I think a couple of years back, you will see the answer states that CNAMEs are at the root aren't really supported by any standard, but some providers does it since it's quite handy, right? So basically the DNS spec, which was drafted way back in 1980s or something, what it established is that you cannot add a CNAME record to your root domain. Now the reason for that is different, we'll come to that, but the basic idea is that if you have a domain like learn.abc.com, it can point to CNAME to any domain, anydomain.com for example. abc.def.com can also be CNAMEd, but def.com won't be CNAMEd, right? So what this does, it creates a problem when you have a provider like Cloudflare or Vercel in front of you, like Cloudflare specifically, I would say, where you never really get dedicated IP addresses, right? Because let's say if this is a person, like I gave the example of Fermion, if this is a person we want to bring this person on Fermion, what we need to do is we need to let this domain return a set of Cloudflare IP addresses which points to, you know, the origin, which is our own Fermion domain, right? So that in this diagram, for example, user opens that IP address and Cloudflare can just redirect it to our server. Now you might be thinking, hey, why can't you just add these two IP addresses? Why can't you ask the user to add these two IP addresses directly? Well, that is because you cannot proxy within the Cloudflare infrastructure, you cannot proxy data to their own infrastructure, right? So if you go to the DNS and if you try to add the same IP address, it won't work. Number two, the problem is that these IP addresses are not fixed. They are rotating. So Cloudflare might remove this IP address from their pool. And in that case, the website would just break. So we don't want that, right? CNAME is the only option if you're using a provider like Cloudflare, and GoDaddy, for one, does not support, rightly speaking, I think, does not support CNAME at root level because the DNS spec doesn't allow that. However, if you go ahead and take a look at this blog post from 10 years ago, almost more than 10 years ago now, Cloudflare introduced a RFC compliant CNAMEs at the domain's root known as CNAME flattening. So I think Cloudflare, I'm not sure if Cloudflare was the first company who did this, but Cloudflare definitely made this popular. What CNAME flattening basically means is that this blog post basically goes a little bit in deep, you know, how DNS and everything works. So you can see over here, I think it's also written from 1987. At the time, no one conceived of a website. It was 2 years before all of that. As a result, the DNS spec enshrined that the root record, the naked domain without any subdomain, could not be a CNAME. Technically, the root domain could be a CNAME, but the RFC state that once a record has a CNAME, it can't have any entries associated with it. That's a problem for a root record like example.com because it will often have an MX record. Okay, so this is the reason why DNS doesn't allow, the official spec doesn't allow the root domain to be CNAME, because once you add a CNAME to a domain, you cannot have other records. That is why Cloudflare broke the RFC spec and they introduced CNAME flattening. So what Cloudflare CNAME flattening basically does is that it does operate exactly like how CNAME would do in a regular sense, that it would return a set of IP addresses. So for example, when I dig codeater.pro, this is a CNAME record. It is a CNAME record at the heart in the DNS because we know we have set it up with this creator, but this still returns to A records directly because this domain is hosted on Cloudflare, and Cloudflare supports CNAME flattening as one of the features, right? So what Cloudflare did is they say that what we needed was a way to support CNAME at the root but still follow the RFC and return an IP address for any query of the root domain. To accomplish this, we extended our authoritative DNS infra in certain cases to act as a kind of DNS resolver. What happens is that if there is a CNAME at the root, rather than returning that record directly, we recurse through the CNAME chain ourselves until we find an A record. Okay, let me tell you what this means. So let's say if we have another website, I'll just give an example of somebody who's hosted on a subdomain. So if I do something like this, you see, I dig on learn.co law.codersgan.com. So this is also one of the websites that uses Fermion, for example, but this is on a subdomain, right? So this subdomain, what this does is that now it returns just 3 records actually. So law.coderscan.com returns as a CNAME of Fermion. Then the CNAME of Fermion returns as 2 IP addresses. So how the DNS resolution technically works is that if you have a CNAME, your computer will get that CNAME record back, like I said over here, and then your computer will ask the CNAME that what is the IP address, and this CNAME would return those 2 things. CNAME flattening, what it does, nothing except for the fact that this thing is internally done by the DNS provider itself. In this case, if it is Cloudflare, if I do it with codeater.pro, for example, codeater.pro, you see that I don't get a CNAME entry like I got over here in this case. Even though the CNAME record exists, I'm telling you this exists because we set up this domain. This CNAME record exists, but this is not visible to the client. So the recursive DNS resolution is performed by the DNS holder itself, in this case, which is Cloudflare. So that's it. That's basically it. Cloudflare supports CNAME flattening by default. I think many providers, Porkbun is also one of the domain providers that supports CNAME flattening. So you see there is a CNAME flattening also has a name called an alias record, right? So I'm not sure if it is official or not now, but CNAME flattening record is also known as an alias record. So Hostinger supports this, Porkbun supports this, Cloudflare supports it, but your favorite #1 registrar in the world, GoDaddy, does not support it. So if this domain, for example, this one, Rahul Coding Academy, is on GoDaddy, there is no way for us to host this domain on Fermion. There are ways, of course, we can just change the name servers directly to a Cloudflare instance and then point the CNAME back, but you get the idea, like it's a little bit of hassle. So long story short, the only reason I would say that if you're buying a domain in today's time and if you're trying to pick up a registrar, do not go with GoDaddy. If you have a use case where you want to host, let's say, a website or something using a platform like probably Fermion or some of these platforms, because GoDaddy as a domain registrar very strictly follows, I think, DNS spec, even though like CNAME flattening has been there for at least 10 years now, as visible from the Cloudflare's official blog. So I think, yeah, that's pretty inconvenient, because we had like conversations with some of these creators, some of these people who have domains on GoDaddy, and this is how we also discovered that, okay, this is a huge mess, this is a huge problem, so we can't do that. So yeah, hopefully you learned something new in this about DNS domains, CNAMEs in general. If you did, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, check out Fermion if you're interested in creating your own coding school, coding academy online. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. I'll see you in the next video really soon.